If you're a college student or in banking or consulting looking to break into tech, or if you're just one of the thousands of tech employees looking for a new job right now, this is the video for you. We're going to be going step by step through what you should be doing to land that tech job of your dreams. I'm a venture capitalist trained at some of the biggest funds in Silicon Valley, and before that worked at Google and VC-backed startups. But I wasn't always an insider. I was raised in the Midwest by parents who immigrated to the States from a farming community in rural Taiwan. My personal goal is to demystify the opaque hiring process in tech and to help amazing people find their place within tech's vibrant but complex ecosystem. And to my surprise, there's not actually any videos on YouTube that outlines this process end to end. So let's get started. Now, before I dig in, if you're one of the many who lost your job in the layoffs sweeping through tech, take a deep breath. While losing a job can be a relief for some who are in a terrible work situation, for a lot of others, it can take a huge toll. Studies have shown getting fired is one of the few things in our lives that can have a long-term impact on happiness, on a similar scale to getting a divorce. So it's important to go through whatever process you need to be at your best before diving back in. Remember that there are tons of reasons people are let go that has nothing to do with you or your performance. And even if you weren't a top performer, that doesn't mean you can't be a rock star in a completely different environment. Even Oprah was fired at one point. If you have the means, now would be a great time to catch up with family or friends that you lost touch with because of work, or go on that trip that you put off to make your last project deadline. But this all assumes you don't need income right away. Unemployment benefits can be a big help, so make sure you file immediately if you qualify. But even then, it might not be enough. So it's helpful to first take inventory when you're let go and figure out how much you need to buy enough time, whether it's 4, 6, or 9 months or more, to be able to properly run a process and find the right next job for you. Everyone's situation is a little bit different, but a lot of people will work part-time so they can support themselves. You can message past colleagues or companies to see if there's any contract work. There's also so many marketplaces these days where you can pick up extra income, whether it's driving an Uber or working on Upwork or maybe renting your place out through Airbnb. Whatever it is, your goal is just to make sure that time and money are not working against you, forcing you to make a poor decision while job hunting. Okay, with that out of the way, now you're ready to job hunt. But before you just go looking up a bunch of companies, you're going to make things so much simpler for yourself if you have clarity on what you're looking for. That includes understanding whether the role and company really plays to your superpowers. Everyone has a zone of genius. Does this map against yours? What do you need to unlock your best self? What kind of work environment and work culture do you thrive in? What kind of hours and work-life balance are you open to? And ultimately, what's your primary objective here? Is it career advancement, money, building a network, alignment with your own sense of purpose? If a lot of this sounds trivial to you, I actually think most people don't have a strong framework for how to find their dream job. And I think this is one of the big drivers we're seeing job dissatisfaction and job switching at an all-time high. This kind of self-awareness will serve you wherever you go, even beyond the next job. Related, I think another way a lot of people fall down is they just don't know what they care about most. It's all well and good to think more of everything is better, more money, more impact, less hours, but the truth is we all have to make trade-offs. One way to get clarity is to take 100 points and assign them across all the different job criteria. That will force you to make the trade-offs explicit, and then you can grade the different job opportunities you have across the same criteria to see what maps best. Now, with that in mind, there are a ton of different entry points into tech, from early stage to late stage to big tech. And so I'm going to walk through all the different trade-offs that you would face in thinking through that. Contrary to what a lot of people believe, if you mostly care about getting rich, the early stage startup world is probably not for you. There's just so many more predictable ways to accumulate money. It's easy to get tempted by stories of how Google and other tech companies minted millionaires by the dozens when they IPO'd, including secretaries and janitors when they got in on the ground floor. But the vast majority of startups fail, and early employees typically only get a tiny fraction of shares that are only life-changing if a company is truly generational. The reality is the risk-reward trade-off of joining a startup is almost never worth taking from a pure monetary standpoint. On the other hand, mid-level engineers at Google can make 7 figures in a year, partners at McKinsey can make that much as well, and hedge fund quant traders can make a lot more than that. Most of the people I know who've worked for those companies for more than 10 years have accumulated mini fortunes for themselves. I'm not saying that's the only reason one would work at a Google or a McKinsey or in finance, but the point is, if your goal is to get rich, there are much more likely pathways than joining a startup. I've actually personally gone through all those pathways at different points in my career, and I'll make a separate video covering them in detail later. On the other hand, if you're more mission-driven, joining a startup can be an incredibly rewarding way to pursue that, often unencumbered by the rigid structure of legacy incumbents. If you're passionate about solving mental health access above and beyond the slow-moving healthcare system, or tackling climate change through a novel carbon capture technology, that type of clarity will dramatically simplify your job search. Likewise, your job search will be much easier if you know their specific skills you're looking to gain, or certain technologies like generative AI, or even tech stacks or frameworks like Node.js you want to work on. One of the most underrated benefits of joining any company is the relationships you build with teammates in the trenches. These people can become lifelong friends, mentors, employees, or co-founders one day. The tech world is littered with examples of this, like the PayPal mafia, who ultimately went on to start several other billion-dollar companies and hold positions of influence as a sort of shadow Illuminati of Silicon Valley. If your primary goal is building that kind of network, you should be laser-focused even more so on the people and vetting their raw horsepower, resilience, speed of execution and learning, and ability to recruit. There are clear frontrunners for the next PayPal mafia, in my opinion, like Stripe or Uber. Now, if you want to start your own company one day, joining an early-stage startup can be the best training ground for you. The single hardest part of starting a company is the messy process of finding product market fit, and seeing that done well is the most valuable thing you can pick up. The key thing there is you want to see somebody doing this who's better at it than you. So it's not about just joining any startup. Try joining a company that maybe already has some encouraging signals on usage or revenue, on the verge of finding product market fit, maybe right before the Series A, or join a new pre-product market fit company started by serial founders who've been successful in the past. Okay, so now stepping back, let's say you're just a generally smart person without a clear direction yet. You're a recent college grad, or you're a consultant or a banker or a large tech employee who wants to get into the startup world, and you're looking for the best broad-based stepping stone for your career that will build optionality. So what's the right entry point for you? I would generally say any of the tech giants like a Google or Apple are a safe bet because you meet so many smart people that it's a great launching pad. But those are also massive bureaucratic companies that can really frustrate high performers. In a typical Fortune 500 company like a Google, there may be 4 or 5 management layers over you, and you may have to wait for somebody to retire, get fired, or move on to continue progressing up the ranks. If you're super ambitious and want to take a bigger swing, I think the best opportunities are fast-growing, growth stage companies that have explosive product market fit at the Series A or B. As Sheryl Sandberg once said, if you're offered a seat on a rocket ship, don't ask what seat, just take it. And it's true, enormous momentum also breeds enormous growth opportunities in ways that are hard to anticipate. The key, in my opinion, is to find a company that is growing and hiring quickly, but doesn't have their C-suite built out yet. They may have a CEO and CTO and a bunch of developers, but don't have a COO, CFO, CSO, CMO, CRO, all the other Cs. And that means that the founders are basically wearing all those hats themselves and are in desperate need of help. If you're a really fast learner who can step in and be a jack of all trades, you can get a lot more responsibility than you would elsewhere. You might be too junior to get that C-suite title, but you can effectively handle a lot of the same tasks in the interim before a company hires professional executives. And then when they do, if you've done a good job, maybe you can settle into a head of operations type role, skipping the line, if you will, in terms of your seniority. This has been done many times before in Silicon Valley. As an example, Sarah Tavel was an investor at Bessemer who sourced Pinterest at the Series A. She then joined the company doing all sorts of roles from business development to helping the company raise their growth round, and ultimately settled into a product role leading search and discovery before joining Greylock and later Benchmark as their first woman general partner. If you can pull something like this off, this could completely change your career trajectory. Being an early employee at a successful name brand company will not only give you a front row seat into how value is created in a world-class company, but also give you tons of credibility for future roles or raising money for your own company. Okay, so now that you know what you're looking for, how do you actually find that rocket ship company that fits your criteria? This is actually where a venture capital background is quite relevant because scouting for the next big thing is literally what I do all day. At a high level, it's generally a positive sign if a company has been funded by one of the top VCs, like one of these on screen. There's plenty of top VC lists out there, and I'll link some in my description. And each of these venture funds has job boards on their websites that aggregate all the openings across their portfolio companies. But keep in mind, even if this signal increases the chances of startup success by an order of magnitude, at the end of the day, most of even Sequoia or Benchmark's investments will fail. That's just the crazy power law of startups. So assume that top VC involvement is a noisy signal at best. But there are a few pro tips I'm going to share to find a stronger signal here. Most VC funds are actually collections of partners who have different deal judgment and track records. And there's this saying that it takes $50 million to train a new VC because of all the mistakes they'll inevitably make as they learn the craft. So I might take a different strength of signal if a new partner at Sequoia led an investment versus, say, one of the rainmakers like Alfred Lin. And one more pro tip, keep a lookout for what fund led the last round of financing. Big VC funds are so massive these days, they tend to ride their winners all the way up. So even if Sequoia or Benchmark is involved in a company, if a strategic or private equity firm led the most recent round of financing, it's generally a sign the company may not be trending that well. Even better than looking at top VC lists and their investments is just talking to VCs directly. They're great network nodes who are familiar with lots of startups and have inside intel on which ones are doing well. That intel is super valuable since otherwise it's near impossible to know how companies are actually doing from a traction standpoint. That said, often an even better entry point than investors is the head of talent who works for these venture funds. These people's jobs is literally to find exceptional talent like you for their portfolio. So they're A, much more willing to respond to a cold email than a VC typically, and B, actually much more likely to know all the hiring needs across the entire portfolio versus partners who may just work with a subset of that. Headhunters from a search fund like a True or Diversa are also network nodes into startups. Reaching out to these people can be another way to figure out which companies are doing well, and these recruiters can sometimes be a great free source of career or resume advice. There's other ways you can stay on top of the startup ecosystem and job opportunities as well. You can sign up for TermSheet or other similar newsletters that share all of the venture capital financings announced every day. You can also do research on companies on Crunchbase and PitchBook, which are data repositories of startup funding activity. Startup job boards can be helpful too, like Y Combinator, AngelList, Hacker News, and so on. There's all sorts of published startup lists out there, like the YC Top 100 or the Breakout list. But you don't have to completely take everyone else's word for it. There are some more objective, data-driven inputs that you can find on your own. The easiest is getting a LinkedIn Premium or Sales Navigator free trial and checking out the headcount growth of a company. Ideally, you're looking for 100% or more year-over-year growth. In lieu of actually knowing a company's revenue or finances, this headcount growth hack is one of the most reliable indicators a company is performing well. VCs use this trick all the time, although it only works for companies that have more than 30 employees on LinkedIn. If a company has an app, you can also check out their App Store rankings and reviews. And if their homepage is important as a customer entry point, Alexa rankings can also be helpful. And lastly, if you're looking at an open source company, you can check out their adoption on GitHub. A pro tip here is to check out where the GitHub adoption is coming from and seeing if they're well-known enterprises where the project is getting a strong foothold. That's a great sign that the pathway to commercialization may be more straightforward than if users were primarily hobbyists or researchers. And one final note, if you're fairly indifferent on the sector of the company and you're risk averse, I generally shy away from the consumer social space, as well as anything consumer transactional or crypto related. There's going to be amazing companies built, maybe some of the biggest in the world, but the vast majority of successful startup unicorns are business-to-business companies, often in unsexy and overlooked industries. Not only will those jobs be easier to get as there's going to be lower brand awareness and fewer applicants, but the data suggests that these type of companies are more likely to succeed. So now that you've got a list of world-beating companies, how do you get your foot in the door? Most good jobs out there are flooded with resumes. So best case is a strong referral to the CEO, executive, or hiring manager from somebody who thinks highly of you. That will exponentially increase your likelihood to find good opportunities and land an interview. So it's really important that you figure out how do you tap into your own network. This is something you can't just do on a whim. So hopefully you've been making an investment into other people and developing strong relationships that you can lean into in times like this. But don't fear in the case you don't know anyone with a connection into the company. Cold outreach can be really effective. LinkedIn today is a pretty common way to get in touch with startup founders. Most founders won't even ask for resumes anymore because they can just check you out online. So make sure your LinkedIn profile is up to date and demonstrate a positive career progression where you're growing your responsibility over time and you're highlighting concrete, quantifiable impact you've had. But in my opinion, even better than a LinkedIn message is a cold email directly to the founder. Founders send cold emails all the time to potential customers, employees, and investors, so they'll appreciate it if it's done well. Make sure you're concise, you highlight why you're interested, and what you can offer the company very clearly. One tip in emailing a company's CEO or executive is you can usually guess their email as firstname@companyname.com. Even if a company doesn't have an open role that's a fit for you, if you really love what they're doing, you should reach out anyways. Oftentimes, founders will opportunistically make room for people who are clearly exceptional. On that note, very often the best jobs are the ones that you create yourself. One thing I did in the past that was effective is volunteer work to demonstrate value ahead of time. In one case, I worked for free for a week, talking to users and collecting market data to come up with an international growth strategy plan. You could do something similar, even if not a full week of your time. If you want to be a marketer, come up with, say, 3 or 4 key tests that you'd run if you were working for the company. If you really want this job, this is where you could go above and beyond and turn those high-level bullets into a 30, 60, or 90-day marketing plan and send it to the founder. If it sounds crazy to do that much work without potential return, this is part of how Silicon Valley works. There's this pay-it-forward mentality, so offering value to people creates opportunities, if not now, potentially down the line. There's so many founders I know who've been in touch with people they like and offered them a job when it opened up before ever creating a job posting. Okay, so now you've opened up a dialogue with a company, it's time to interview. The interview process for startups and late-stage tech companies and big tech like Google varies widely by company and role. If you're an engineer or PM, there may actually be similarities from big tech to startups, and you can check out resources like cracking the coding interview or cracking the PM interview. There's 2 points that I tack on to any of those resources. And the first is to treat the interview not as a one-way street, but a mutual dialogue. It's in the best interest of the company and you to make sure there's a good fit. Otherwise, it's just a waste of time and resources for both sides. This is why it's important to not only lead with your best foot forward and sell yourself, but also ask probing questions to figure out if you're a good culture fit and deeply aligned with the company's mission and strategy. The second thing I'd suggest is to manage all of your interview processes so they line up at similar points. What you don't want to happen is getting an offer with one company while still being in the early stages of interviewing with a dozen others. So try to get a sense upfront for what the process looks like at every company, so you can, for example, line up all your first rounds around the same time and line up all your final rounds around the same time. And that will increase your chances of getting multiple offers around the same time. It might be more tiring to do it this way, but it will give you more optionality and a better chance to make the right decision. Okay, so now your offers are rolling in. Congratulations, but your work is not done. One of the most overlooked and maybe most important part of the process is actually diligencing the companies where you got those offers. The ball is in your court now. So what do you look for and what questions should you ask to make the final call? If you're doing this right, you'll have already built up a lot of intel in steps 3 and 4 as you're researching and interviewing. But with an offer in hand, now you have the leverage to ask for more granular information on the company. And too often, candidates don't ask questions to figure out if startups actually have product market fit. Not all startups are equally transparent, but if they're serious about getting you on, they should share some measure of how they define success and how they're tracking against that. Generally speaking, for a B2B SaaS company, strong momentum depends on the stage, but at the Series A, typically $1 million of ARR up from 100 or 200K or so. You can pause on this chart to see what growth you typically want to see for successful VC-backed startups. And you can check out this video, which deep dives into all the numbers you'd ideally want to see beyond just top-line growth. As I mentioned before, in lieu of having the company's actual financials, headcount growth on LinkedIn is also instructive to look at. And typically you see companies with strong momentum growing at 80 to 100% year over year. You should also ask the company for their fundraising history. How much was raised, when, by whom, and at what valuation. You'd be surprised how many companies don't announce their funding rounds until much later, so publicly available information can be misleading. And this information, while sensitive for startups to discuss, is absolutely critical for you to understand your comp package. Generally, you want to hear that a company has plenty of runway to hit their milestones for the next round, ideally 24 to 36 months or more in this environment. And you want to see evidence of momentum in their prior fundraising. More money at higher valuations led by top-tier VCs. That said, it's a balance, and you also want to make sure that the last round wasn't done at a crazy 100 times revenue valuation. Some other red flags include not raising money for more than a couple years and raising money from strategics. Without a doubt, the team is one of the most important things to diligence, whether you join a startup or big tech company. So while a company does references on you in the interview process, once you've got an offer, you should absolutely take the chance to do references on who you be working for. And there's just no substitute for hearing this directly from others' firsthand experience. While you can ask your manager or the startup founders directly for people they've worked with in the past, if you have the network to do so, the best way to do it is actually offline references where you use your own network. Then it's less likely you're going to deal with a handpicked reference and you're more likely to get an honest take. Look for any common connections you have to companies they've worked with in the past, and when you do speak with these people, ask open-ended questions. If a founder says they were responsible for launching a product, ask your reference who were the most impactful people in launching said product without mentioning any names, and see what names pop up. Some other things you can do to go above and beyond in researching companies is you can try to speak with active users or customers to get a real first-hand feel for product market fit. You can also try to talk to investors or board members to get their perspective on how they view the opportunity, competition, and how the team has been performing. It may also be helpful to see what employees who've left the company have to say. Okay, so now you've gathered all the data and input you need to make a final call. At this point, I recommend that you enlist your own personal board of directors. This will give you a forum to test your thinking with other people who know you inside out, maybe a past manager, a colleague, or somebody in your field. Think about what perspectives are complementary to your blind spots. For example, people who've worked at earlier stage startups if you're transitioning from big tech to startup land. At the end of the day, if you're running the right process, you'll have a clear sense of what your objective is with this job, what you need to be set up for success, and you'll have gathered the in-depth information you need to figure out how the offers you have map up against that. And you'll have the time and added perspective to make a well-considered choice. And be sure to follow up with companies that you pass on immediately. They invested the time to get to know you and recognize enough of your value to give you an offer. The tech world is incredibly small, and one day your paths might intersect again. And now for the final step. Many people neglect the sometimes uncomfortable but still important step of benchmarking their comp package and negotiating. The good news is there's so many tools online these days to give you some transparency on what you should be looking for. If you're in big tech, there's a lot of really great data at levels.fyi. For startups, I'll share some data from Options Impact, which is a database that many VCs have access to. What you're looking at is the median, so note there is going to be some wide variation. And the data is going to skew a little bit towards tech hubs like the Bay or New York, so it's going to be a little on the high side. As you go later and later stage, you'll see companies will pay you more cash comp, salary, and bonus, but less equity as it becomes more valuable. Early stage startups, on the other hand, are cash poor, but equity rich comparatively. For technical hires, typically junior offers are in the 100K range and go up to 200K for more experienced hires. For non-technical hires, comp is naturally a bit lower. For very early stage startups, these hires can be less common when it's more about building and shipping and finding product market fit quickly. And lastly, here's some data on sales hires. Salespeople are heavily weighted towards incentive-based comp. So your package should be given to you in the form of an on-target earnings or OTE number, which is the expected total compensation if you meet your quota. A typical OTE is half and half base salary and performance-based bonus. Startups might offer you multiple comp packages with different combinations of equity and cash. Generally speaking, for young people, my advice is to take as much cash as you can. If you're joining an early stage startup, I think you should hope for the best and plan for the worst. And that means acting as if the equity value is zero to be conservative. Again, most companies fail, and companies do have the ability to grant you more options later anyways through the employee stock option pool. Now, this doesn't mean you shouldn't weigh shares in your package at all. If things go well at the company, naturally, all other things equal, you want a bigger share of the pie. But I found most people have a hard time understanding the value of their equity. Let's walk through an example. Let's say your offer includes an option on 10,000 shares at a strike price of $1. The last Series C valued the company at 500 million post-money valuation with a share price of $5. And by the way, it's critical that you get this information from the company. The strike price is the price at which you purchase those options. So you need to pay $10,000 to exercise those options for 10,000 shares. The paper value of those shares is $5 times 10,000 or 50,000. And netting out the 10K it takes to buy those shares means your total options value is 40,000. In addition, those options might vest over 4 years with a 1-year cliff. So you have to stay at least 1 year to get any of those shares. And for each year that you stay, you'll get options worth 12,500 shares. To benchmark your offer, you can also divide the 50,000 total value of your shares by the total value of the business, say 500 million post-money valuation. That will give you a rough sense of how much of the business you personally own. Then you can run a few scenarios to get a sense for how much your shares could be worth. For example, if the business were to sell at 5 billion, that would be a 10x increase on the value of your shares. Keep in mind though that you may get heavily diluted over time if the business needs to continue to raise large funding rounds to finance growth. This is where it really pays to join a capital efficient business. On that note, if possible, join a startup right before they raise a new round. Your stock options will be marked at the 409A valuation of the previous funding round, but will be worth a lot more on paper soon after. That's an easy way to avoid at least one round of dilution, which could be 15 to 20% on average. Startups typically raise capital in 12 to 24 month cycles, so if you join 6 to 12 months after a fundraise, you could be in a good spot. You should also ask founders directly about their fundraising plans to get a sense for how this could play out. Once you've got an offer you feel is fair and you've accepted the role, the work is just beginning. I cover much more about maximizing your potential in the startup world on my channel, so subscribe to get notified. Good luck on the job hunt, and thanks for watching.